All right, everybody, we're back here. And next up, we have my longtime friend Roy from Deloitte. And me and him have a little history. We worked together on a Deloitte project at Cisco quite a few years ago. And at the time, we were working in Silicon Valley, I believe in San Jose. And there was a whole lot of people flying in every week at the beginning of the week. And we'd all work there in an office. And then they all fly out at the end of the week and go back home. And these were like scattered all over the place, including Canada. I think you were flying down from Canada every week, people from Boston and all over the place. And this was kind of part of Deloitte's work style back then, is to just really fly a whole bunch of senior people out to work on site at a big client's office. And, every week for all week, and then flying back out. And a lot of things have changed at Deloitte since then. Last year, obviously, COVID, the pandemic kind of forced us all into our houses, and a lot of companies have had to evolve and transition to remote work styles. And so, I asked Roy a few weeks ago, how has this impacted Deloitte? And he told me about, basically a new concept called digital teams that they're doing there. And so I just want any of you watching this to just know a little bit about some of these new work styles that are arising, in the workplace. And remote work was already part of, was kind of already a trend before COVID. I think, more and more companies were getting comfortable letting people work remotely, but all that has been tremendously accelerated over the last year. And so I just want you to hear a little bit about how Deloitte has evolved through COVID and started embracing remote work style, letting people work from home, using different tools to kind of tie them together and let them collaborate more closely together. Because, as you enter the workforce, you'll need to just kind of, know how to work on a remote team. So I'll turn it over to you, Roy.
Yeah, thanks, Leroy. A little bit about me. I'm a director at Deloitte. Really, the last year has been quite a ride for us and a massive disruption of the way we normally do business. So a little bit about what myself and my teams do. Basically, we design and build systems for many of the largest companies in the world. So fintech customers, ride sharing, railroads, banks, airlines, telcos. Basically, if it's a brand that you're familiar with, you probably do some work with them in some form or another. And I think Leroy, gave you a good little introduction on how we met and sort of what we were doing at the time. But just to kind of zoom out a little and give you a bit of a sense of what my life looked like for, let's say the 5 years pre-COVID, and then how things have changed. So from about 2015 onwards, I looked up the numbers, and I averaged at least 100 flights a year. I had weeks where I was in a different city each day. And I live in Canada. So a couple of interesting ones. I flew to India for a one day session. I once flew from San Francisco to Switzerland for a 2-hour meeting. And I kind of have to ask, well, why, right? Like, why would people even do that? But it's really just, that's how we've always done it. It's what our clients were comfortable with, traditional organizations that have been doing things the same way for a very long time. And it worked pretty well. I mean, the business that we do is, highly valuable to the customers. Getting the right expert, to bring to bear on a particular problem is, sometimes that's, worth the cost of sticking somebody on the plane and sending them somewhere. And it was the model that we were comfortable with. It was what we felt, was proven and what we felt that the customers would be, willing to pay for at the end of the day. But then, COVID hit. So it's kind of how I'll tell you a little bit about how that went. So it's actually a bit more than a year ago now. So I was sitting in a meeting in Montreal with a client of mine. And one of the folks there asked me if I was worried about the new coronavirus that was in the news. And I told them, oh, no, I'm not worried about it. I worry about a few things like that most of the time. And boy, was I wrong. So little did I know, that was actually the last time that I'd be on a business trip, at least for the foreseeable future. And when I came back home that next week, we went down into lockdown, and I have not set foot on a plane since then. And neither has the vast majority of our workforce. That, up until now, the basic idea has been, like Leroy said, you kind of get experts together from all over the country. Key requirement is you pretty much have to work, or you pretty much have to live in a city with a major airport in order to be in our line of business, because you're going to be on a plane, at least once a week on average. Once each way. And really, when we looked at this, it really had to shift a lot of momentum. So our organization, Deloitte, is about a little over 100, I think it's 176 years old now as a company. So just to kind of think of that degree of history of more or less us doing the same, the same style of work, working directly with clients in their offices, working with them on their documents. I mean, the internet obviously made a big difference to us, and not a lot of companies I can say they were around, even before computers, but we've been around for a very long time. So the shift for us to, in a year, just completely reimagine that business model and shift to embrace digital work and digital teams has been really, really profound. And I want to share a few things about that particular shift. So the first thing that it shifts is the location of the work. And as we went into lockdown, what we found was our people were sort of dispersing. We have big hubs in Vancouver, in Calgary, in Toronto, all in Canada, same for many of the cities in the US. And it's always tied to the airports, where you have to be near an airport, because if you're going to be commuting, every week to some client location somewhere in North America or somewhere in Europe, it just doesn't make sense for you to have to take 2 or 3 connecting flights to get anywhere. Or much less live somewhere where there isn't an airport nearby. But as we began to kind of observe what was happening and talking to people, you notice you're in a different spot than where you normally are and things like that. We found that people don't really want to live near the airports. Like if you consider what is the location that's going to give me the best quality of life, proximity to an airport mostly shouldn't factor into that. So we had people spread out quite a lot. We had a team that was highly centralized in Calgary in particular. And at this point, we have no 2 people in my group that live in the same city or are currently living in the same city. So that was a huge shift for us just in terms of location of work. And then the second shift, and I think it's very complementary with the location one in many ways, is the timing of the work. So our digital teams are way more asynchronous than ever before. And that requires some technological support because people weren't really used to working in that way. So we use Teams. Other organizations will use Slack and other frameworks like that. And what that allows us to do is when I have a question for one of my teammates, I can put it on a Slack channel. They can answer it when it's convenient for them. And the norms that you establish in a team like that is you don't expect somebody's going to answer you within a minute, 2 minutes when you post the question. You kind of, if something was really urgent, I'd give somebody a call. But most of the time when you're working on things, it's not that urgent. And just because you need a piece of information right now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's worth disrupting whatever somebody else is doing. And this is especially true in technical work. Like I'm sure many of you know, if you're heads down on a problem and somebody interrupts you, you could lose an hour of sort of focus building and getting into your flow state for that disruption. And you don't have the regular cues. Like, I'm sure many of us, you wear the big headphones when you're in the office, you don't want to be disturbed, things like that. In a digital workplace, that becomes much more the norm than the exception. So the shift towards sort of asynchronicity in the work also gives people the freedom to work at the times that are efficient for them and that work for them. And this becomes really a merger of life and work to a degree that we haven't seen before. And it means getting the work done, when it's convenient for you around, family obligations, around other obligations. Something for me, many times when I'm out doing meetings, I'll go for a walk while I'm on a team meeting. You can talk to people just fine if you don't need to be in front of the screen, things like that, where you kind of say, okay, let's combine some of my life objectives and my work objectives together and see how do you generate a new normal that fits what your goals are in all aspects, not just looking at it from a work perspective. And the work's not being done according to a clock on the wall either. And honestly, it wouldn't even be clear what clock you would be talking about because my team's now spread over 4 different time zones. So, each person has certain times of the day that they are responsible for working, or that they're comfortable working, I should say. We've got certain outcomes that we need to generate for our clients and in the work that we do. And the shift has basically gone from, time in the office, the idea of, I've got to put in my 8 hours, my 9 hours, my 12 hours, depending on what your industry or your role is. It's just gone away completely because you can't really measure the time somebody spends in the chair or the hours spent in meetings as being, the productive hours of the day. It's really about outcomes. It's really about making sure that you can, get the work done, get the right work done, get it done to a high standard of quality, and maintain sort of an overall team dynamic that supports those types of outcomes. But in order to do that, in order to kind of allow people to work from anywhere and work at any time, the other shift that we see, and this has been really big in my business, is around the shifting to a digital representation of work. And it's not, we say digital, but it's more than just, putting your tasks in an Excel sheet. We've been doing that for a long time now. It's more than even a Microsoft project file or a PowerPoint slide. It's really about moving on to shared collaboration platforms. So a big area of focus for me is a technology stack called Servicenow that, it's basically focused on providing services in an enterprise context. So that's been a huge boom over the last year as people realize that you really need a digital representation. It's not just about writing down what is the work that needs to be done, but when person A is done with their work, routing it to person B, that's the next step in the process. If somebody is potentially impacted by a piece of work that you're delayed on, being able to notify them efficiently without having to set up meetings for all of that. So really taking the vision of digital work and translating it to something where the systems are actually adding value, and where you can say, yeah, I've got a Kanban, but a digital Kanban is so much more powerful than sticky notes on a wall. And in many ways, pre-COVID, we weren't taking advantage of all the capabilities that were out there. So that's been a really big shift for us, is really allowing us to have the systems drive some of that digital workflow, not just having things written down in a file on somebody's laptop and then updating it in a meeting. And that's the sort of thing that was often common in the past. So like I said, Teams and Slack, those are some of the big areas of focus, but really the role of meetings as well. So meetings went from being the primary way of sharing information between team members. I would say we were probably sharing maybe 90% of the content that's being conveyed between people in our teams would be verbally or in meetings and face-to-face. And then now I would say we're probably the closest analog would be like your Zoom calls or your Teams calls, and I say we're probably down to about 20% there. And we're passing most of that through our systems. We do a lot more wiki-style documentation where if I have thoughts on a particular design principle that I want to lay down for my team, I'll draw up a wiki page on it. Somebody else will contribute to that and edit it on their time. The other team members are going to be consuming that, making reference to it when they need the information, rather than me hosting a half-hour lunch and learn for everybody, where everybody comes in, learns it today, and by 3 weeks from now, when they haven't used it, it kind of goes away and nobody remembers it anymore. So those kinds of shifts have been big, and these are all things that you could have done before, but there was no onus for it. The structure of the work was working well enough for us that it wasn't necessary to really start moving in this direction. And then when COVID hit and all the different things shifted, it became more and more important for us that we had to find different ways of working. And I think even if we were to go back to having some component of in-person work, I think many of these same principles and lessons will carry through. And to be honest, a lot of the inspiration for it, I did some work with a tech company. I unfortunately can't name them today, but a bunch of work with a tech company that was highly distributed, offices, throughout, even just throughout the Bay Area. And they were very, very focused on digital collaboration. So it took us a little while to kind of catch on when we were working with them. We used to fly down there, and then we'd be sitting in a meeting room in one of their offices, and we'd be meeting with engineers from a bunch of other offices all over Zoom. And after a few weeks of that, we realized, okay, our business model doesn't really work at this company. But we learned a lot from that in terms of focusing on things like the use of wikis. Confluence is a common one. Teams has a bit of a wiki capability, things like that. And this is the opportunity now for the more traditional organizations to begin to actually pick up these methods that have made many other organizations very efficient. And that brings me to the next point. The way that work has shifted massively changes the perspective of people that are hiring for talent. And I think that's something that you guys will really want to think about as you're kind of progressing in your careers, starting to think about what your potential next steps might be, where you may want to be, 3 years, 5 years down the road. It's not so important where you're physically located or even the time zone that you're in, if you're adopting a digital teams type strategy, and if the organizations that you're looking at working with adopt a digital team strategy. So instead of competing, or instead of as a hiring manager, if I kind of look at the pool of candidates in my local city, we're a little over 1 million people in our city, and that gives me a certain pool of potential qualified candidates. But then if I expand the parameters of that search to all of Canada or all of North America, all of a sudden I've more than 1,000-fold increased the scope that I can actually apply and the number of potential candidates. Because we're also not a big, Calgary is not a big tech hub. We're traditionally an oil and gas town. So there's probably many cities where there's much greater access to the right people. And in the same way, you might have a chance in the near future to work for an organization that's maybe doing work in an area that you're passionate about, that's focusing on the technologies that you're interested in, or focusing on particular industries that just aren't available in the location where you work. And it's not easy for everybody to kind of pick up and move for a job. Some people do, some people don't have that option, or there's other priorities that are a little bit more important. And maybe you're not going to relocate to New York to get into, financial industry, or you're not going to relocate to the Bay Area to get into tech, but you don't have to anymore, because it's all digital, and the location just becomes less and less important as time progresses here. I would say as well, the other part that's really important is sort of the nature of the work. So as you guys probably, many of you will have encountered, if you have worked any time in the tech space, you've kind of got in many organizations this idea of like your project management office, which is kind of the people, the group of project managers that are responsible for managing schedules, that are responsible for managing plans, that are responsible for basically making sure the work gets done. And oftentimes those individuals are highly organized. They've got everything laid out, exactly step by step of how the project is going to run. And then they'll meet with people to get their updates. They'll try and assess when there's interdependencies between projects, things like that. And that whole skill set has been massively disrupted. We released a capability for a digital project management office, where we can actually reduce the number of people that are required as part of a project management team to run, let's say, a large ERP implementation. We can actually cut down for a good-sized ERP implementation. You might normally have 8 people running that function. By leveraging some of the digital technologies and the more asynchronous type of work, we can actually cut that down by almost 50%, which is pretty material if you think about it. Those are people that can be taking on other projects. Project management in tech it's not an easy skill to find great project managers. So if you can free up half of your high quality delivery resources for other initiatives, that's a really big deal for a lot of organizations. And it all comes down to an intelligent digital representation of the work. How do you make sure that you've got a plan where each person is allocated to a certain set of tasks? If your things are starting to run late, you see it. You've got dashboards where you can immediately access that information. When something is overdue because you've gotten a notification about it. Your project manager knows when something's overdue because they see it coming up on their dashboards as well. If you flag a risk with a particular issue that you're working, or a particular task that you're working on, that becomes immediately visible and eligible for escalation, maybe to your project steering committee. So, it's not just about getting the work done in a different place at a different time. The nature of the work is shifted to be more digital in nature. And it's less about the one person with a whole plan and model in their head, and it's more about how do you actually create a representation of that that's accessible in real time to people and helping to actually drive that work, which has been a huge shift for us. But honestly, probably one of the most valuable shifts that I've seen in terms of the way that we do work. And just the people efficiency. I've always hated when I'm doing work and I feel like, oh, this is just busy work. It's not something that adds direct value. I'm not building a cool feature. I'm not solving an interesting business problem. I'm just trying to make sure that my I don't know, my vendors are on time with a particular implementation that they need to do, or something like that. Now I can spend way less time on that kind of stuff, and way more time on sort of what's the vision, and honestly on helping people, managing people, and thinking about how people actually want to work, and career aspirations, coaching, stuff like that. Frankly, that's what leadership should be about. It shouldn't be about can you make sure that somebody's gotten their work done on time. That's something that the computers are just fine with keeping us accountable for dates and stuff like that. And it's something that, once again, it's just, could you have done it 5 years ago? Yeah, probably. Most of the technology was there. But it took the crisis and the pandemic to really trigger the change. And the sorts of things that we're seeing is we're seeing organizations, client organizations saying, hey, consultants, we used to spend, let's say $100,000 on a project, flying you guys around, paying for expenses, stuff like that. Just as an example number. Let's take that and put that towards digital tools to help our teams work more efficiently. So we've seen folks making those sorts of investments. And frankly, you get a whole lot more value from implementing a system for collaborative work than you do having somebody sitting in a plane for 8 hours a week kind of thing. But there's also downsides for people, and we really need to think carefully about those. And it's something that I would encourage all of you as you kind of progress in your careers, as you start to manage people, and especially to the extent that the teams are digital and remote teams. There's things that you want to think about as well. And that can be, people can feel a little bit more disconnected. For a lot of folks, work is one of their primary forms of social interaction as well. And, most of the people they see during the week might be at work. So the sorts of things that we've been doing to kind of help mitigate that a little bit and sort of continue, especially as you onboard new folks. I've got people on my team now that I'd never worked with that I hired after the pandemic started. So what do? We digital team events, play games together. I'm not a big fan, honestly, of let's get everybody on a Zoom call and just talk with 8 to 10 people in a team. Doesn't work all that well. But fun challenges, lead code challenges. Just yesterday, I spent an hour with my team playing GeoGuessr. If you haven't done that, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. You learn a lot about people when you. I had no idea one of my team members can read Japanese. Kind of cool. Which happens to be very useful in that game. And the other part as well is, work is shifted into people's homes. So, I'm sitting in the same chair that I, play League of Legends and StarCraft in. It's part of who I am. And people have more complex lives. Childcare, education, and other factors. People are really, it's not just about the work, and especially because it's not about the 9 to 5 anymore. So it helps to be able to recognize that, if somebody's got a kid at home that they're homeschooling, that's going to have, potentially different impact on what hours they're going to be available, the degree of focus during certain periods, and that's perfectly fine because we're all, real people. And I think pre-COVID, there was very much, and I would say in many professional industries, and consulting in particular, there wasn't really a focus on bringing your whole self to work. It's kind of you are the professional consultant. You kind of have a particular way of handling projects and working on projects. And I think authenticity is something that this whole experience of kind of bringing the workplace into people's homes has really helped build, and helped build better connections. It helped improve the way that people relate to each other in many ways. And I think it's useful as well. I personally don't have kids, but, I recognize when somebody's kid comes up to them in the middle of a Zoom meeting, that kid is way more important to them than whatever I was talking about, and rightfully so. And, you kind of get a bit of a window into other people's lives, as the workplace shifts to your home. and it becomes a bit more authentic, I think, in many ways. It's not just about the professional image; it's about the whole big picture. And I think that it's important as leaders in organizations and as members of teams in organizations that we think about things like that as well, especially in kind of the distributed model. So I don't see us really ever moving back to the way that things were in the past, but I think we may see a little bit of a hybrid. You may see certain individuals, probably like your salespeople, they're probably still going to get back out there on the road. I think technical teams, very likely not. In consulting, it was actually something that always kind of bothered me a little bit. Earlier in my career, I actually spent about a year flying from Calgary to Pittsburgh every week. And I was leading a development team out there. So we had 5 different development team members, most of them from Calgary, but a couple other from other places in the world. We would pick up and fly every Sunday night because you couldn't get there Monday morning. So we'd fly Sunday nights, we'd fly out to Pittsburgh, go sit in an office, like just us, our team, sit in actually a boardroom. So you kind of repurpose boardrooms for things like that. For Monday through Thursday, and then Thursday night you go on home. And it just never made much sense, but there was never any triggers for change. There was never anything starting to tell us, maybe there's a better way. And the clients were happy with it, and the folks that are deciding on how the projects get planned, plan for the expenses to be over there, and all of that. And there is certainly some advantages to being able to get the whole team together in one place, but does it have to be every week? Do you really need to spend, I think at that point it was something like 8 or 9 hours each way. So I think 18 hours out of your week on a plane? Probably not. And I recognize that our organizations are a bit more extreme, and maybe it's not 9 hours on a plane. Maybe it's a 30-minute or a 1-hour commute for you every day going to the office. But if you're able to join an organization that's distributed and virtual in this way, that half an hour each way every day, or an hour each way every day, really adds up. And think, what more can you do with that time? What more can you do? If you're not doing things just because it's the way that it's always been done, and not focus just on the traditional ways of working. And then I think there's also a lot of disruption still possible in the sort of the space of digital representation of work. So some of the things that I've been thinking about is, how do you formalize meetings more effectively? So right now, the one thing that we still struggle with that still has to be fully synchronous is the idea of meetings. So when people are getting together on a Zoom call for an hour at a time, oftentimes if it's highly interactive, if people are making decisions on a certain topic, that's something that probably no way around that for the immediate future. But as you begin to look a little bit deeper, oftentimes you'll have meetings where the primary function is distribution of information, and then recorded sessions are something else that we've shifted to quite a bit. So many times, if we've got sort of a meeting as more of a one-to-many type nature, then what we'll do is we'll actually pull together. There'll be a time slot where you can go attend it live if you like, or we've got sort of like a similar concept to like a video blog where you can go and you can say, okay, let's listen to these announcements, or this particular set of content. And that also just contributes to, now all of a sudden this is something that I can play at 2 times speed if I want to. It's something that I can maybe multitask while I'm consuming some of that content, and things that are just not possible in the traditional way. But I think there's still a lot of opportunity, because video recordings of an hour-long meeting, it doesn't do a great job of summarization. So I think there's opportunities for people to do really cool projects where you do AI-based meeting summarization, for example, I think would be something, or extraction of key information. Nobody has time when you get to more senior levels in an organization. You don't have time to attend all of the meetings that you would really like to attend. or I shouldn't say like to attend, that's maybe the wrong word, but all of the meetings that may have some relevance for your domain of responsibility. So if you can imagine sort of enhancing the way that we represent that work and represent that information and being able to route it to people on a more subscription type basis, or more of like a publish subscribe type model for certain concepts, certain projects, that can really have a really big influence. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface on what's possible in those domains. I think as well, if we look at the way the hiring process works, when Leroy was talking to me about a NAC, I don't know how long ago now, maybe a year and a half, something like that. Sort of in some of the discussions, and I thought to myself, is there really a big enough market for like remote engineering that this would be such a critical like function that could be a differentiating value proposition for people in a recruitment business. And now, that's key. That's one of the first things I go to when I'm looking to staff people, to bring people onto my team. It's, can you work in a remote environment? So, the folks at this conference now, like, you're right there on the leading edge, and many of you have gotten there, in advance of the curve, and you're way ahead of the game. Because the folks that have been used to the 9 to 5 punching the clock in the office and the government buildings and things like that, they're not ready for this round of disruption. And I think now is really the time to either get into or kind of double down on really outcome focused work. And it's not about can you put in the face on, you spend the hours in the seats, that kind of thing. It's really more about what are the outcomes you're trying to accomplish. And I always find it's very motivating if you're working on particular outcomes, you're working on a project that's interesting. That's when I'm personally motivated. When you start to get to the point of maybe not, I won't say just busy work, but things that are more administrative by nature, I would say, or where you're kind of spending time, maybe you're spending a half hour on something between meetings, and you can't really get into the details of solving the problem in that amount of time, but you don't really have something else scheduled for that period. Now with the way that work is set up today, I can go to my Teams channel, I can answer a few people's technical questions, which is probably what I'll do after this session. And things like that. It improves the efficiency with which we can work. And I think this shift it's really exciting to be starting a career or building a career during a time of change like this, because it'll allow you to showcase your ability to adapt and your ability to really, really focus in on, what's your core value proposition, what can you do really, really well. And then you can market that and apply that anywhere in the world, not just the city that you happen to live in. And maybe the answer is, this year the best place for you to be applying your efforts is a pharmaceutical company in the Bay Area. Maybe tomorrow or the next year it's a hedge fund in New York. You've got that flexibility now because the precedent has been set. Digital teams are going to be here to stay, and I don't think we're going to run into a situation where organizations that revert back to the previous model are possibly going to be as competitive as the ones that take advantage of sort of the new globalized workplace, the globalized way of getting things done. It's just too big of a handicap to be tied to a certain time of day, to be tied to a certain geographical location where your main offices happen to be, for many, many reasons. So I think that's the kind of a little bit of a summary of where we are now, how we think about things. And certainly I'd be more than happy to answer any other questions, or if anyone has any other areas you'd like to explore, I'm more than happy to comment on that as well.
Well, that was mighty interesting, man. Roy is one of the smartest people I know. So no, that's interesting, dude. It really is. No, I was actually trying to get my daughter over here and kind of show my kids and my wife and kind of emphasize this idea that you mentioned about how, this digital remote sort of, this new remote work style has kind of added authenticity to a lot of, areas around management, because you get glimpses into people's life that you wouldn't normally get when you see them in the office every day. But, my daughter's 4 years old, and sometimes she just screams and goes crazy when you try to put her in front of the camera, and she feels like people are looking at her. But no, it's been a crazy world, man. I mean, and when I founded NAC, there was no way I could foresee that we would just get caught in the right place at the right time with COVID kind of, I mean, I could see, at that point I did see that remote work and remote collaboration was the future. I just expected that it would probably be, sometime in the 5 to 10 year range before it actually became a reality. And then all this stuff happened last year, and it just, I mean, we almost skipped 5 years and kind of jumped right into that world. And so I'd already been working as a remote consultant, as for a lot of years, and just kind of got used to collaborating remotely. And I figured, and I just kept seeing more and more trends towards that especially with tech work. Mm-hmm. But no, as you know, I mean, it's important for anybody will be entering the workforce soon, or who's already in the workforce, to, just really think hard about, again, what you said, outcome-based work, instead of sort of the butt in the seat kind of thing, where as long as you go to the office, you're sitting in your seat and everyone can see that you're actually working. You punch in at 9, you punch out at 5, you take your 1 hour lunch break, and everything is fine as long as everyone can see you. And, we're moving to a place now where it's not about that. It's about, can you actually get the work done in the time allotted, and so you have to actually be able to, just boom, hit these goals, and, you give some sort of objective, get it done in a certain amount of time. And that's just a whole different sort of, way of doing work that, I thought it was really important to share with people.
Yeah. So something interesting, I don't know if you recall, and I honestly don't know if you've changed it, but your voicemail, maybe, I don't know what, a couple of years ago, do you want to share that?
It's still the same way, yeah. No, it got to the point when I decided to just permanently transition to remote work, and I gave that talk this morning where I showed everybody how I optimized my resume and used the job boards to drive inbound leads, and kind of explained the whole inbound job search approach, where you should never be out looking for jobs. You can actually optimize your resume and your LinkedIn profile and create inbound job leads, and then you just get to sit there and kind of sift through your inbox and decide what you want to look at or not. And even set up, once you get to the point where you're being completely flooded with inbound sort of requests, set up filters and kind of run stuff to different places, so you just weed out the non-remote. Mm-hmm. But it got to the point where that was working so well, and it still does to this day. I just don't really, right now, I'm not looking for contract work, but I leave all those coming in. And I just, and I had my phone number on the resume. I told him this morning, you might want to put your phone number on there. You might not. I mean, when you're first getting into this and you don't already have a whole bunch of inbound lead flow, you might want to put the phone number on there just to get the phone ringing. But it got to the point where, like, all day my phone was just brr, 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 over and over and over. And so I finally put that voicemail on there that said, if this is concerned a remote position, whatever. And if it doesn't, hang up. Please hang up. I'm not working in an office. Mm-hmm. So no, it's an interesting new world. I mean, I've been able to, my daughter's 4 years old, and I've been able to spend every single day of her life. I mean, every little new word she learns, every new little weird thing she imitates on YouTube, I get to see. And, there's, and again, I do believe there's some cons to it. I mean, because we do get a lot of social interaction, and in a lot of ways, going to work or going to school physically, adds some social depth to your life that you don't get in the house. But in other ways, it allows you, especially if you're a parent, or if you're, a youngster and you enjoy being around your parents and your siblings, it just gives you a lot more time to, bond as a family, get to know your family members, and, pretty much just do whatever you want to do in a lot of ways. I mean, like you said, mixing work with lifestyle and just basic life, where you can, take meetings when you're just, going wherever, going on a walk. And it's a fascinating new world, man. And I like you, I do not believe we'll ever return back to that previous normal. I believe it's going to be a new sort of hybrid normal,
Mm-hmm. I think some companies will try, but I just don't believe they'll be competitive.
Yeah. No, I mean, you look at the amount, just the sheer amount of money that was involved in flying all those teams around back then. And I mean, it's just like, you're talking about a tiny fraction of that to build out that sort of remote collaboration infrastructure. And it's just, mm-hmm. Companies that do it the old way, if they try to return to that, just won't even be able to compete with these new companies that have really truly embraced and mastered remote work styles,
Yeah. And I think the other part that this is really setting us up for, that I think is well worth some thought, is as you move towards that digital representation of work, and it's not just in people's mind anymore, now it's actually in a system, in a structured way, that's the opportunity for more and more of this to be AI enabled as well.
Yeah.
Because we now have this year, we have probably 100 times, if not 1,000 times more data about the way that people are working than we did in previous years.
Yeah.
And I think that, that evolution is going to be absolutely phenomenal over the coming years as well. Like we're really on the convergence of a couple of these different things. We're going to change a lot and really drive, new business models. There's going to be, entire industries kind of spun up around, the automated execution of work, routing of work, things like that. And really getting to insight from all of the new data that's being captured in this digital representation of work.
No, and it's also interesting, as you know, it's interesting to see how this is impacting education. I mean, me and you both, you actually finished. I went for about a year and dropped to kind of chase all my entrepreneurial dreams. But me and you both attended the Stanford Center for Professional Development, which is sort of Stanford's way of offering really high caliber sort of education, regardless of geography. And I mean, that was, as you know, that was some pretty intense study. And then also I realized, I'm not sure if they rolled this out as a result of COVID or if they already had it, but I discovered, we were my 14-year-old son is heading into high school, and we were looking for some kind of really high quality remote school for him to go to. We're still trying to figure out, we live kind of on the outskirts of Dallas, and there's not a whole lot of nice private schools right here without driving about 30 minutes or so. And I noticed that Stanford has now Stanford Online High School, and it's kind of hard to get into, you got to do it a little bit in advance. So we missed this last window. But, all this stuff is obviously impacting the way that education is delivered as well, as you know. And I'm sure you enjoyed that AI certificate program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Something else I'll mention as well, it may be relevant to some of the folks on the call here. Something we started working on actually last year around this time when the pandemic hit. One of the Stanford professors started up a program called Code in Place, which is also just like the idea of how can you digitally distribute the content that they normally have as part of their introductory level computer science course. So it takes people through digitally online with small group instruction, takes them through the introductory content for a basic computer science course, learning Python, things like that. So if anybody, and I think they're actually starting it up, I'm going to teach for it again this year. But I think they're starting that up. Applications open up, I believe it's in the next week or so. But yeah, if anybody's interested in that kind of thing. And it's just, there's so much available online now, so much sort of digitally accessible that, the education world, I would say, it's already disrupted to a very large extent. It's really cool that that's even making its way to things like, the actual schooling side of things, not just, content people on demand.
So are you going into the master's program now or what?
Not sure yet. Hopefully I'll find out about that in the next couple of weeks.
You already applied, huh?
Applications in, so fingers crossed.
So what is it? MS in AI?
That's Master of Science, Computer Science. Good luck to me.
Serious stuff.
Tough one to get into, but fingers crossed.
Oh man, you'll definitely do it. Yeah, no. So anybody who is watching here, and just know that Deloitte is like one of the big four, and that's like the big four is like the four biggest accounting firms in the world, which I think Deloitte is kind of head of the pack there. But aside from accounting, they just do a whole lot of other stuff, including a lot of Servicenow work, a lot of blockchain work, and just really interesting stuff. And Roy is probably again, I know you, a lot of times you're on the modest side, but I would say he's probably got to be the top 20 to 50, 20 to 30, whatever Servicenow developers in the world. And, has helped me in a lot of ways, and I've enjoyed your friendship, man.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, it's a privilege to be here and speaking for this conference. And yeah, it's been great. And yeah, if folks are ever interested in, career at Deloitte, feel free to find me on LinkedIn. Roy Justice is my name.
And Servicenow is my game. Servicenow and AI now. You've been pretty deep on the AI stuff for a while. So
yeah. I'm telling you, man, the fact that the work is getting digitized, that's going to be like the foundation of some crazy AI innovation. And we're starting to see it already, starting to implement it for our clients. Like, there's so much potential there, and it's completely untapped. The same way that like the internet companies were able to like leverage like search and things like that because they had really good large data sets. Companies are going to be able to start collecting a lot of that stuff now. And even with the potential of like things like transfer learning models, you have so much opportunity to start getting value very, very quickly. And the stuff that's available now that, frankly, the best researchers in the world didn't have access to 10 years ago, you could find for free on TensorFlow Hub right now.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing, the convergence of these different factors. And I've always found, if you can identify one trend and kind of squeeze in on one trend, that's great. But if you can find two or three coming together in a way that people haven't thought about before, and I think remote work, AI, microservices architectures, like, as all of these things converge, there's so much opportunity here to do things that nobody in the world could do 10 years ago. Today, anybody at this conference could probably do some of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. So Roy's teaching a boot camp every night right now, and it's a little late to get into it, but it's machine learning and Servicenow. But all of these boot camps, as well as all the talks on the main stage, will be available for playback on the main site, hackathon.com, here after the conference closes. So definitely check it out. We appreciate you being here, man.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. So yeah, so I just wanted to, I'm giving you a little glimpse into how COVID has impacted some of these companies and how they've had to scramble to kind of adjust to this new remote world. I had already been kind of embracing it a little bit before COVID happened, but I definitely had no idea that we would just get hurled headlong into it. So I'm actually glad that I had already adapted to that work style. I mean, literally, other than hoarding food and buying a couple extra freezers for the garage, it really didn't change my life at all. There was no interruption in my income or anything, really. My son was already doing remote schooling with K12.com, who's one of our sponsors here. And we literally just kind of cruised through the COVID like it really didn't even. It was a very small hiccup in the road. And so, it's just important that you, sort of get yourself sort of aligned with this remote work culture and remote work style, remote learning, because you don't know when something like that can happen again. And you definitely don't want to be one of the, enormous numbers of people that basically found themselves without work and, on unemployment and struggling to support their families. So embrace remote work, learn everything you can about digital collaboration and remote learning. And try your best to develop the skills that will allow you to work remotely in case we ever find ourselves hiding in our houses again because some pandemic is, tearing through the streets. So we'll be back here shortly.